They had my daughter by both arms when the first scream cut through the tree line. Those two HOA goons yanking her off our porch like they were hauling contraband instead of a terrified 18-year-old girl who did nothing but exist on her own family's land. Their cheap vests flashed HOA enforcement like some toddler printed them in a garage, and their boots scraped across the old cabin boards while Riley twisted to break free. The sound of her shoes dragging against weathered wood snapped something violent awake in me before I even stepped outside. They barked fake orders with the bravado of wannabe cops who'd never held real authority a day in their pathetic lives, shouting about HOA arrest powers and lake access violations like they were federal statutes instead of delusions printed out in Claudia Vexler's living room. One of them dragged her harder, lifting her off balance while she fought to keep her feet under her. And right there, while Riley screamed for help, I heard the line that made my blood go still. "You're under HOA custody." Before we move forward, drop a comment from where are you watching right now. Riley choked on her breath as they pulled her toward the steps, but that's not even the half of it. They didn't see me yet. They were too busy living out their power-drunk fantasy, dragging a kid across a porch they had no right to be on, trespassing so hard it almost felt theatrical. The porch light swung in the breeze above them, creaking against the beam, as if even the cabin itself knew what was about to happen. The goon on the left tightened his grip, knuckles white, face twisted with fake authority that had no foundation in state law, county law, or reality itself. He kept repeating the same line about non-compliance, like he'd been practicing in the mirror, trying to convince himself he mattered more than a clipboard parasite, bossing him around. But here's where everything blew apart. The screen door slammed behind them because I pushed it open with more force than I intended. They stopped mid-stride, shoulders snapping stiff like prey that just heard a predator breathe. My boots hit the boards once, twice, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Controlled dominance. The kind that comes from spending years tracking violent fugitives across 3 states while commanding a U.S. Marshals task force that answers to no one in an HOA, ever. My shirt stretched across my chest with the emblem nobody mistakes. My badge glinted under the cabin light with a weight no fake vest could rival. And the rifle in my right hand settled naturally into position like it was born there. The air changed. Even the pine trees went silent. Riley looked up with this wild mix of relief and panic, her hair falling across her face, her arms still pinned by 2 idiots who didn't realize their lives had just split into before and after. The goon on the right swallowed hard, Adam's apple jerking like he'd forgotten how to breathe. The other one tried holding tighter, like doubling down on idiocy would save him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Let my daughter go." My words hit harder than the rifle in my hands because real authority doesn't shout. It just exists. It fills the space until everyone else understands their place. Wrong move, though. The man on Riley's left yanked her again, using her as leverage like a shield, like he thought she could protect him from the reality walking toward him. His grip left red marks blooming across her skin. She called out, voice cracking with anger instead of fear, because that's who she is. Fierce, stubborn, unbreakable. But fury rolled through me in cold waves, the kind that doesn't shake hands or negotiate. The kind that ends confrontations. My finger rested near the trigger. Not on it, but close enough that both men finally started to understand they weren't the ones running this show anymore. One of them tried to puff up, bark out, "Put the weapon down. This is HOA jurisdiction," unquote. Bad choice. I stepped closer, boots sinking into the porch like each stride carved their fate deeper. "This land isn't yours," I said, voice low enough to make both of them twitch. "This property isn't yours. And that girl you're holding, definitely not yours." The one on the right took half a step back before realizing he still had Riley trapped. The left one dug his fingers harder into her wrist, trying to use her as bargaining power he didn't possess. He had no idea he'd just trespassed into federal territory with the dumbest move of his life. He didn't know who I was yet. He just knew someone bigger than his fantasy had arrived, and his fake badge wasn't enough to hide behind anymore. Tension knotted the air so tight I could feel it humming in the boards beneath us. Birds scattered from the branches overhead, sensing the shift before the men holding my daughter did. Riley winced as they tugged her again, and that was it. My decision locked into place. I raised the rifle another inch, enough to make both wannabe enforcers stop breathing for half a second. One of them tried to spit out another order, his voice cracking as he shouted, "You're bluffing. You won't do anything." He didn't know me. He didn't know I've stood face to face with cartel runners who didn't blink when I drew on them. He didn't know I've dragged murder suspects out of ditches without raising my pulse. He didn't know I've tracked armed fugitives for days through marshland just to slap cuffs on them with a straight face. He didn't know I command a U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Unit with jurisdiction that steamrolls every HOA claim from here to the county line. So I told him, calm, precise, deadly. You boys picked the worst possible driveway on earth. Riley's breath hitched. The goon on the left blinked, trying to compute what that meant while his grip finally loosened just a hair. But the other one made his final mistake. He dragged her again. One last yank toward the steps, believing distance would protect him. He got 3 steps before my decision became action. The rifle rose, my stance locked, and the world narrowed to a single point of impact. Here's where everything truly detonated. Claudia Vexler didn't start as a trespassing tyrant. She evolved into one, layer by layer, feeding off the cheap power the HOA handed her, like it was a crown meant for someone important. Pine Ridge Shores wasn't a community. Under Claudia, it became a cult with laminated rules and surveillance creeps posing as volunteers. The residents didn't elect her. They surrendered to her because she bullied harder than anyone else on the board. She controlled parking, she controlled trash days, she controlled porch furniture. Then she convinced herself she controlled the lake. The problem was simple. My family never belonged to her kingdom. Our cabin sat across the water, outside her jurisdiction, untouched by her petty boundaries, protected by county lines older than her entire HOA. 60 years of ownership, documented in deeds my grandfather recorded by hand, maps that survived 3 remodels and 2 floods, boundaries verified by county surveyors the year I was born. The land was ours, untouchable. But Claudia hated the word untouchable because it meant she couldn't touch it, couldn't rule it, couldn't expand her imaginary empire across the lake like she'd done on her side of the water. Her obsession started small, like most power addictions. A letter slipped under the cabin door months ago claiming we were violating lake access hours. Then a notice taped to the railing saying we had to register our property with the HOA. Then another note claiming unapproved occupants were staying at the cabin. I ignored them. Claudia didn't. Riley moved into the cabin for the summer to take online classes. She liked the quiet, the woods, the distance, the safety. She grew up strong, steady, level-headed in a way that made me trust her instincts more than most adults I worked with. She spent mornings journaling on the porch and evenings kayaking across the lake, gliding through the stillness like she belonged to the water itself. Then the first message arrived from her. "Dad, some HOA people came by. They said I need an ID to be near the lake." My jaw clenched. Not out of fear, out of calculation. HOAs talk big, they posture, they bluff. But walking onto private land and demanding identification? That wasn't petty rule enforcement. That was the beginning of an intimidation pattern used by wannabe cops who imagine their clipboard gives them authority they've never earned. I told her to record everything. She always does. 2 days later, she messaged again. "Dad, they keep driving past the cabin. Slow, watching." Another day passed. Then, "Dad, they knocked again. Said I'm trespassing." I told her exactly what to do. Stay inside, lock the doors, document every angle. And that's when the emotional shift began. Fury simmered low, restrained only by distance. I planned to drive up the mountain the next morning and end the game right there, but Claudia escalated before I could get there. The HOA board was nothing more than a collection of petty overlords addicted to authority they didn't have. Claudia treated them like foot soldiers, and she made them feel important by giving them titles she printed herself. HOA Patrol, Lake Compliance, Shoreline Guardian, delusions glued to cheap vinyl patches. These weren't officers. They weren't trained. They weren't even licensed security. They were bored men desperate to feel powerful under a woman who needed control like oxygen. And she fed them lies. The entire lake is under HOA jurisdiction. Visitors must be logged. Private cabins still fall under community review. She said the words with such conviction that these men believed they could enforce them. They believed their knock on our cabin door meant something. They believed their slow drive-bys were legal. They believed their presence was justified. The problem? Belief doesn't override county records. Belief doesn't override property law. Belief doesn't override decades of land ownership locked down by federal-level documentation my agency could verify with one phone call. By the time Claudia sent her so-called enforcement unit, the fake cops had built themselves up into something dangerous. Not because they were skilled, but because they were stupid enough to think they had power. The emotional pressure on Riley grew each day. She told me she stopped sitting on the porch at dusk because she could feel them watching from the tree line. She heard boots on gravel at random hours. She spotted flashlights sweeping near the waterline. She noticed a black SUV parked at the far side of the lake at dawn, unmoving, engine cold. They wanted to rattle her. They only succeeded in rattling me. Claudia upgraded her harassment by sending the two biggest parasites on her roster, men who lived for moments like this, moments where they could pretend they were real law enforcement. They arrived wearing stitched vests so thin a strong breeze could have ripped the fabric, slapped with HOA decals and crooked lines. They stepped out of their SUV like they were storming a barricade. They strutted around the cabin like they were searching for fugitives. And somewhere on the other side of the lake, Claudia sat in her lakeside chair, probably sipping iced tea, imagining she had orchestrated a righteous enforcement action. But here's where everything turned. As I drove toward the mountain that morning, I replayed every message Riley sent, each knock, each slow pass, each trespass. And something dark settled in my chest. Not rage, not panic, but a cold, steady calculation I hadn't felt since working federal standoffs in the marshlands. Every instinct screamed this was escalating faster than harassment should. HOAs escalate with fines, with threats, with warnings. They don't escalate with hands on a child, unless someone is delusional enough to think the rules they invented give them that authority. Claudia's upgraded behavior wasn't HOA overreach, it was criminal ambition. The night before the attack, Riley called me whispering. She said the men had come back again. She could hear them arguing outside, debating whether she was in violation because she refused to report for ID verification. She recorded every second. I listened to it 3 times before dawn. I didn't hear confusion. I didn't hear hesitation. I heard certainty. I heard 2 men fully convinced they had the right to take her if she refused to comply. That is not HOA enforcement. That is premeditated coercion. That is the beginning of a kidnapping attempt. That is when my restraint ended completely. I drove faster, but they moved sooner. Before I stepped onto that porch in Section 1, before I raised the rifle, Before they realized they were seconds from meeting the full weight of federal authority. Everything had already shifted. They had crossed from boundary harassment into criminal trespass, from intimidation into unlawful detainment, from shoveled-up power fantasy into something that carried the weight of felony charges, prison time, and a federal task force crashing down on their HOA fantasy world like a hammer. When Riley texted me the final message, "Dad, they're back. They're on the porch," I knew exactly what I was walking into. All the signs pointed to one inevitable outcome. If I didn't get there in time, Claudia's goons would escalate from verbal intimidation into physical control. They believed they could take her. They believed no one could stop them. They believed their HOA president could shield them. They were wrong. Claudia's HOA wasn't a community organization. It was a miniature dictatorship held together by gossip, fear, and a handful of men desperate enough to obey her every command. She built her little empire inside a clubhouse that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee, where she sat at the head of a long table, pretending she was chairing national security briefings instead of monthly HOA meetings. The walls behind her were plastered with laminated rules, maps she drew herself, boundary lines she invented after losing sleep over imaginary infractions. She created committees for everything: committees for dock access, committees for leaf collection, committees for fence inspections. None of them had legal weight. All of them had psychological impact. Her followers weren't board members. They were enforcers trained through years of ego feeding and paranoia. She spoke, and they listened. She pointed, and they acted. She whispered about non-compliant residents, and her surveillance creeps patrolled the lake trail like private security guards, earning a salary instead of volunteers desperate for validation. Her power structure ran on fear. Fear that she would fine you, shame you, or send her enforcement unit to knock on your door at night. And for most residents trapped under her rule, that was enough. But our cabin didn't fall under any of her invented jurisdictions, and that drove her deeper into obsession. She started studying county property maps, enlarging them, drawing circles and arrows, trying to find a loophole that didn't exist. Her board members told her the cabin wasn't hers to control. Claudia didn't accept that. She hated lines she couldn't cross. She hated ownership that didn't answer to her. She hated independence. And she hated me because independence is the one thing her HOA cult couldn't dominate. That's where the abuse grew teeth. She began sending her surveillance creeps around the lake at dawn, pacing with clipboards like they were patrolling the perimeter of a prison. They started writing fabricated citations for dock violations and shoreline encroachment, even though our land didn't fall under HOA review. They walked right up to boundary markers they weren't allowed to cross and stared at the cabin like they were scoping a target. Riley recorded one of them, muttering that she needed to be brought in for questioning. And I felt my blood go cold because that wasn't HOA language anymore. That was low-grade militia talk coming from men who thought Claudia's laminated handbook gave them authority to enforce laws they didn't understand. This is where the abuse transitioned from harassment to coordinated stalking. The HOA SUV began showing up in the tree line, sometimes parked for hours, sometimes rolling slow enough that it felt like a threat instead of patrol. They knocked on the cabin door at night. They banged on the porch railing. One night, Riley heard footsteps circling the entire structure, slow, methodical, like they were mapping weaknesses. The emotional escalation in her voice each time she called me wasn't fear. It was exhaustion mixed with anger, the kind that builds when you're being hunted by people who think their neighborhood title makes them gods. She told me they started shouting from the driveway, demanding she step out for verification. That phrase alone lit every federal instinct I had. Verification is what real officers request during lawful stops, not HOA thugs trespassing on land they don't own. I checked county jurisdiction forms myself, just to confirm what I already knew. The cabin was unincorporated, outside all association boundaries, immune to HOA rules, fines, and complaints. I reviewed property lines, deeds, surveys, GPS coordinates. Every official document proved the same thing. Claudia had zero authority here. Not a sliver, not a loophole, not a technicality. She was trespassing every single time she sent her goons near my daughter. And she knew it. Her HOA mafia knew it. But power-drunk people don't care about boundaries. They care about winning. They care about control. And Claudia wanted control so badly she was willing to rewrite reality until her version became the only one that mattered. Cliffhanger number 1 arrived when a neighbor sent Riley a photo. Claudia holding a clipboard, pointing across the lake at our cabin, her face twisted with the smug certainty of someone planning something illegal. That image fueled everything that followed. Cliffhanger number 2 surfaced when Riley found footprints along the back tree line. Fresh, heavy, spaced like someone was pacing. She took photos. I matched the boot shape to the same brand one of Claudia's goons wore in a video she recorded earlier that week. Cliffhanger number 3 erupted when Riley heard voices outside at midnight. One saying, "We should bring her in tonight. Claudia wants her processed." Processed. That word doesn't belong to an HOA. That word belongs to criminals. The villain behavior upgraded again when Claudia issued her final command. Riley heard it herself because the 2 goons weren't subtle. They parked at the end of the dirt road, windows down, radio volume loud. Claudia's voice crackled through their cheap walkie-talkies like a general sending soldiers into battle. "If she refuses again, detain her," Claudia said. "She's violating lake access protocols. Bring her to the office. I'll handle the paperwork." Paperwork. She really believed her meeting minutes could override state kidnapping statutes. She believed her HOA bylaws could rewrite the county's property map. She believed that if she barked loud enough, her cult would obey. And they did. They listened. They nodded. They prepared. They marched up the cabin steps the next morning ready to take a girl who hadn't committed a single violation. Riley's final message to me came through tight with panic. "Dad, they're back. They're walking up the porch. They're arguing about taking me in. One's reaching for me." And that was enough. That was the line where HOA abuse morphed into criminal intent, where the trespassing overlapped with attempted detainment, where harassment evolved into a felony. My daughter wasn't dealing with HOA board members anymore. She was dealing with men molded by a woman who worshipped control more than law. She was dealing with a cult that believed they could abduct her under the banner of lake compliance. That's when everything snapped into place. I drove faster. My hands tightened on the wheel. And by the time I reached the cabin, by the time I stepped through that screen door in Section 1, by the time I raised my rifle and announced myself, the truth was carved in stone. Claudia had weaponized her HOA into a kidnapping machine, and her goons were carrying out her orders without a second thought. I didn't walk into that cabin blind. Long before I stepped onto the porch with a rifle in my hand, I had already built a case heavier than anything Claudia's HOA cult could ever imagine. It started the moment Riley told me they knocked on the door demanding identification. That was the warning bell. HOA parasites thrive on ambiguity. They use vague rules, invented bylaws, and fake enforcement language to confuse homeowners. But the moment they stepped onto land, they didn't govern. Everything changed. So I began documenting, verifying, cross-checking every square foot of our property against county records. I logged the GPS coordinates, downloaded the official GIS maps, pulled up archived surveys that confirmed what we already knew. Our land sat cleanly, definitively, and legally outside of the HOA's territorial delusion. Every boundary line was in our favor. Every jurisdiction form invalidated their imagined authority. Every deed in our archive proved 60 years of ownership, untouchable and untied to Pine Ridge shores. And while I collected evidence, the HOA Goons kept giving me more. They circled the cabin. They left notes. They shouted orders from the gravel road. They pressed their faces up to the porch windows like surveillance creeps looking for contraband. Every action, every trespass, every intimidation attempt, Riley recorded all of it. But that's not even the half of it. One night, Riley texted me a video that made my jaw set like concrete. In the footage, 2 HOA enforcers stood at the tree line, whispering, their silhouettes outlined by moonlight. One said, "Claudia wants her processed. Verification mandatory." Processed, mandatory. Words borrowed from law enforcement, twisted into HOA fantasy, spoken by men who didn't know those phrases carried federal implications. I replayed the recording while cross-referencing the county statutes. Everything aligned perfectly for what I feared. This wasn't harassment anymore. This was premeditated detainment. And detainment on private land, without jurisdiction, without authority, without legal grounds, crosses directly into false imprisonment and attempted kidnapping. The emotional escalation rising in my chest wasn't panic. It was precision. The kind I've used in fugitive hunts dating back over 20 years. The kind that settles the mind instead of shaking it. I started documenting timestamps on every message Riley sent. Every knock, every shadow, every harassment attempt. I built a timeline, 60 events deep, and every single one pushed Claudia further into the territory of criminal conspiracy. Here's where everything blew apart. The next piece of evidence didn't come from Riley. It came from the lake itself. A neighbor kayaking at sunrise took a photo. Claudia, standing at the edge of her deck with her binoculars raised toward our cabin, her finger pointed like she was marking a target. When the neighbor sent Riley the picture, I zoomed in on Claudia's expression. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't concern. This was obsession. A self-appointed queen convinced the lake bowed to her authority. But her gaze wasn't aimed at property lines. It was aimed at my daughter. That image became Exhibit A. Then came Exhibit B. Riley heard footsteps circling the cabin at midnight. She stayed silent. Phone recording pressed to the wall. The audio captured gravel crunching, branches snapping, heavy breaths, deliberate pacing. I listened to it 3 times. The rhythm wasn't random wandering. It was perimeter scouting. Then she recorded them talking near the back door. One whispered, "She's alone. Claudia said bring her in if she refuses again." That single line detonated everything I'd been tracking. Claudia wasn't confused. She wasn't mistaken. She wasn't misinterpreting the property map. She was directing an abduction attempt. The authority beat locked into place when I cross-checked state law with federal standards. Under Georgia law, detaining someone without legal authority constitutes false imprisonment. Under federal law, attempting to forcibly transport someone across grounds they do not control, especially under fake law enforcement status, qualifies for kidnapping and impersonation of officers. And my agency, the U.S., Marshals, takes that combination dead seriously. I documented everything in a folder labeled Pine Ridge Criminal Activity. Photos, videos, maps, audio logs, transcripts, timestamps. Even the HOA letters Riley found taped to the porch railing went in the file. The more evidence I gathered, the more obvious Claudia's escalation became. She wasn't just trespassing. She was orchestrating a criminal operation under the disguise of community enforcement. But the real turning point, the cliffhanger that changed everything, came when Riley caught the 2 HOA enforcers on video rehearsing what they'd say. They stood by their SUV, adjusting their vests, gripping their radios like props in a middle school play. One said, If she resists, say she violated lake protocols. The other replied, if she runs, detain her. Claudia said we're allowed. Allowed. The word echoed through the recording like a confession. Allowed by who? Certainly not county law, not state law, not any legal statute written in the history of Georgia. Claudia had created her own police force with zero authority, zero training, zero credibility, and she sent them to my daughter. The next day, the day everything finally snapped, Riley sent me a message I'll never forget. Dad, they're coming up the porch. No panic, no screaming, just tight, controlled fear. I heard footsteps behind her. I heard angry voices. I heard someone say, grab her. The phone dropped. I heard the thud of someone hitting the railing. That audio became the final piece of proof I needed before acting. It wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't suspicion. It wasn't a pattern of behavior. It was an active felony in progress. God. So when I reached the cabin, when I stepped through that screen door, when I saw their hands wrapped around her arms, when I heard her breath catch from the pressure they applied, everything I had documented transformed into purpose. Every piece of evidence aligned into one brutal, undeniable truth. Claudia weaponized her HOA into a kidnapping machine. And the two men dragging my daughter off her own porch weren't just trespassers. They were criminals executing her orders. I had the proof. I had the legal backing. I had the federal authority. And now I had the opportunity to end it. The moment I stepped onto that porch, the world narrowed into a single, violent truth. Claudia's entire HOA mafia had pushed this trespass fantasy as far as it could go. They crossed the line, then buried it under their boots. Riley was still pinned between them, her hair stuck to her cheek, her breath sharp, her arms twisted back by hands that had no right being anywhere near her. The two HOA goons didn't loosen their grip even when they heard the screen door slam. That told me everything. They thought they were untouchable. They thought their stitched vests and cheap decals made them law. They thought Claudia's voice in their earphones gave them immunity. They thought the rules they invented mattered more than the law I enforce every single day. Their arrogance hung thick in the morning air like smoke. The goon on the left tried to pull Riley another inch toward their SUV, tightening his grip like she belonged to him. His partner took a half step backward, trying to drag her off the steps entirely. That was the last move they made without consequences. I raised the rifle just enough for them to feel the shift. Let her go. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. People who've stared down fugitives don't shout, they calculate, they announce, they deliver. The goon on the right froze for a split second before he tried to mask it with a fake cop bark. Drop your weapon. This is an HOA enforcement action. Hearing that nonsense from a man trespassing on federal land nearly made me laugh. Instead, I stepped closer. One deliberate footstep. Then another. This property isn't yours, I said, voice like a locked trigger. This land isn't yours, and my daughter isn't yours. Riley twisted again, trying to break free. The goon on the left yanked harder, red marks blooming across her skin. Stop resisting, he snapped at her like a bad actor, rehearsing lines from a movie he didn't understand. That was the moment I stopped giving warnings. I tightened my stance, my shoulder locked, my eye lined up with the rifle sights. The goon on the left saw it too late. His voice cracked. You won't shoot, you're bluffing. I exhaled slowly, the way I've done in hostage standoffs, the way I've done in tactical raids, the way I've done when the only choice is to stop the threat before it becomes irreversible. I command a U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force, I said, and you boys just committed a felony. The right-hand goon panicked first. He jerked backward, dragging Riley with him, trying to use her as a shield. Bad decision, fatal decision. Not for his life, but for his future. I fired. Controlled. Precise. 2 rounds center mass, exactly where they'd drop him without ending him. He collapsed instantly with a scream, legs folding beneath him as he hit the ground and rolled into the pine needles clutching his vest where both rounds hit. Not lethal. Intentional. Stopping power only. The second goon spun around, eyes wide, fingers still crushing Riley's wrist as he tried to drag her toward the SUV. He wasn't thinking. He wasn't planning. He was running with her in tow, running like he thought he could outrun federal law. He made it 3 stumbling steps before I squeezed the trigger again, 1 round to the shoulder. His scream cracked the air as he spun sideways, losing every ounce of leverage he had on Riley. She tore free and sprinted toward me, shaking, breath ragged, but safe. I kept the rifle leveled, eyes locked on both men as they writhed in the dirt. "Stay down," I growled. "Move again and you'll regret it." The power dynamic shifted instantly. 30 seconds ago, they were dragging a girl off a porch like they owned her. Now they lay bleeding in a place they had no authority to be, realizing the weight of every mistake they'd made. "Dad," Riley whispered, voice trembling. "They really tried to take me." "I know, sweetheart," I said without looking away from the men. "They're done." But that's not even the half of it. I pulled my phone from my pocket with one hand while keeping the rifle trained with the other. I dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, I spoke with federal precision. "This is Deputy Director Cole with the U.S. Marshals. 2 armed suspects impersonating law enforcement attempted to kidnap my daughter. Shots fired. Both suspects down but alive. Send county units and EMS to Pine Ridge Cabin now." On the ground, both HOA goons froze, eyes wide with dawning horror. They knew exactly what that call meant. They knew federal charges hit harder than any HOA rulebook. They knew prison time wasn't a warning anymore. It was a guarantee. Sirens began echoing faintly through the valley, climbing up the mountain road fast. Riley stood behind me, arms wrapped around herself, eyes locked on the men bleeding into the pine needles. The first one, the one who tried to drag her by the arm, was unconscious, chest rising shallowly, vest soaked from the impact of the rounds. The second was still awake, barely, groaning, clutching his shoulder with both hands. He wasn't getting up again. Not today. Not ever in my presence. The gravel road trembled. 2 county cruisers tore up the driveway, skidding to a stop with doors flying open. Deputies Morales and Hensley jumped out with weapons drawn until they saw me standing there with my badge raised. "Cole, what the hell happened here?" Morales shouted. I didn't lower my rifle. 2 suspects impersonating HOA law enforcement attempted to kidnap my daughter off our porch. I engaged. Both are down but alive. Hensley knelt beside the unconscious goon, checked his pulse, and looked up. "He's stable, not talking anytime soon." "Good," I said. "He's done enough talking for 1 lifetime." An ambulance pulled up next, medics rushing past us. And that's where everything blew apart again. Morales looked at the shredded HOA vests lying in the dirt and shook his head. "These idiots really tried to take your daughter up here? At this cabin?" "They worked for Claudia Vexler," I said. The name hit the air like a gunshot. Morales stiffened. Hensley muttered, "Oh, hell." Everyone in 3 counties knew Claudia caused problems. Nobody knew her HOA cult had escalated into federal crimes. Then a 3rd vehicle rolled in. Black, unmarked, government plates. My team. 2 deputy U.S. Marshals stepped out, Warren and Lee. Rifles slung, eyes sharp, scanning the perimeter like this was a fugitive takedown. Warren whistled low when he saw the suspects on the ground. "Kidnapping attempt?" "Yep." "Assault on a minor?" Yep. Impersonation of law enforcement? Add that too, I said. Lee knelt beside Riley. You okay, kiddo? She nodded weakly. I just want this over. It will be, I told her. My team secured the scene fast. Weapons collected, radios bagged, vests photographed, everything documented. County deputies stepped back. This wasn't their case anymore. This was federal. Medics loaded the two goons into separate ambulances. Warren looked at me. You know what this means for Claudia, right? I nodded. She's next. But that still wasn't the end. Later that night, after Riley was safe inside and my team finished clearing the property, Morales returned with a printout. Arrest warrants approved, he said. Federal kidnapping, conspiracy, impersonation, everything. What about Claudia Vexler? I asked. Morales gave a grim smile. She's getting the big one, directing a kidnapping of a Marshals' daughter. U.S. attorney signed it in under an hour. 2 days later, the public collapse hit Claudia like a freight train. The two fake HOA cops were charged with attempted kidnapping, impersonating law enforcement, aggravated assault, armed trespassing, and federal conspiracy. 14 years each, no parole, no deals. Claudia was charged with orchestrating the kidnapping attempt, directing impersonation of federal officers, criminal coercion, conspiracy, and endangerment. She got 18 years. Her HOA was dissolved, her assets seized to cover fines. Her kingdom collapsed in a blink. By the time the dust settled and the court dates were assigned, the truth spread through Pine Ridge shores like wildfire. Residents whispered, deputies talked. News crews spiraled around the HOA entrance like vultures. Claudia's cult scattered, her fake enforcers cried, her board resigned in disgrace. And every one of them learned the same thing. You don't lay hands on a Marshals' daughter. The moment the ambulances pulled away and the sirens faded down the mountain road, the air around the cabin shifted from chaos to calculation. Not panic, not confusion, calculation. That's the part people never understand about federal retaliation. Once the threat is neutralized, the response becomes surgical. Cold, methodical, clinical. I walked back into the cabin with Riley at my side, her hands shaking, her breath still uneven, but her chin lifted the same way it always has when she refuses to break. She sat at the kitchen table while I set my rifle down, opened my laptop, and logged into the Marshals system with a level of calm that didn't match the destruction outside. She watched me work, eyes tracking every keystroke, and I made sure she understood exactly what was coming next. They're not getting near you again, I said. Not after tonight. Not ever. But that's not even the half of it. Expert retaliation doesn't start with anger. It starts with evidence. I uploaded every file we collected. Videos of the men whispering about processing her, audio of them pacing the cabin at midnight, photos of their SUV parked at the tree line for hours, timestamps of each trespass, body positions, radio chatter, threats, footprints, everything. Then I added the recordings Riley took during the ordeal itself. The goons shouting HOA arrest orders, dragging her across the porch, barking commands that had no legal standing. Those files alone carried enough weight to bury Claudia's HOA fantasy. But I wasn't stopping there. I filed affidavits myself. First-person, federal-level statements detailing the events, the escalation, the moment they laid hands on my daughter. I logged the precise location of the confrontation, cross-referenced the property boundaries, and added legal citations covering false imprisonment, impersonation of officers, and attempted kidnapping under both state and federal law. Here's where everything blew apart. While I documented, my team outside uncovered even more. Warren returned with a folder thicker than the HOA rulebook Claudia worshipped. Inside were printouts from the SUV's onboard computer, showing marked times the vehicle had circled the cabin. There were notes the goons kept in their sun visor, handwritten orders like verify porch occupant, capture photo evidence, and the most damning line, detain if necessary. Not request, not question, detain. Under Claudia's initials. Evidence of conspiracy doesn't get cleaner than that. Then, Lee walked in holding a cheap walkie-talkie they pulled from the bushes. He replayed the last transmission it received. Claudia's voice crackled through the static. Bring her in. Stop arguing with her. She needs to comply. That one recording turned the entire case from trespass into orchestrated abduction. And because she issued the order across electronic communication, it entered federal territory instantly. The emotional escalation inside me didn't rise like fury. It dropped into something colder, something harder. A place I only visit when someone makes the mistake of targeting family. I began building the prosecution package right there. Federal forms, arrest affidavits, witness statements, county collaboration requests, cross-jurisdiction filings. Expert retaliation isn't loud. It isn't chaotic. It's quiet enough to scare people because calm means certainty. I printed maps with red circles around every location the HOA thugs trespassed. I annotated their movements in a 12-hour timeline. I highlighted every law they violated. Riley sat beside me, watching her nightmare turn into evidence so strong it could tip a courtroom's foundation. Villain behavior always collapses under the weight of truth, and Claudia's collapse began faster than any board meeting she ever ran. County deputies called me an hour later, saying Claudia tried denying everything. She claimed she didn't send them, claimed it was a misunderstanding, claimed her HOA was conducting routine lake compliance checks. But then investigators searched her home office. They found the meeting notes. They found the printed enforcement protocols she made, detailing steps to secure non-compliant individuals. They found a spreadsheet on her computer listing residents by risk level, with my daughter marked as Category Red. They found drafts of notices she planned to deliver, threatening fines for unregistered cabin use, which didn't fall under HOA control at all. Every lie she tried to float sank instantly under the weight of her own paperwork. Cliffhanger after cliffhanger unfolded through the night. First, a county deputy called to say Claudia tried to delete files when they arrived. Too late. They were already copied. Then another call saying she tried to blame the goons. Too late. They were already in federal custody. Then a third call. Claudia attempted to flee her house when she saw the black government SUVs rolling in. Too late. She got 5 steps before deputies cut her off on the driveway. When the federal arrest warrant was approved, I drove down to the station myself. Riley rode with me, silent but steady. She wanted to see the end, and she deserved to. When we arrived, the deputies met us with updates. Claudia had been processed, fingerprinted, escorted into holding, her eyes red from crying, her shoulders shaking not from fear of jail, but from the collapse of her imaginary empire. My team handed me copies of the booking documents, charges listed in bold across the page. Kidnapping conspiracy, impersonation directive, endangerment of a minor, criminal coercion, and obstruction. Everything she built fell apart in a single night, and she wasn't even the one shot. The last piece of expert retaliation came when I stood outside the holding cell window with Riley beside me. Claudia didn't look up. She stared at the floor, clutching the edges of her orange jumpsuit like she could hide inside it. Riley didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The humiliation was complete. The power trip ended instantly. That night, as we drove back up the mountain, the cabin lights glowing warm through the trees, Riley asked me one question. Is it really over? I glanced at her, then back at the road. For them, yes, completely. For us, it ended the second I stepped onto that porch, and she finally exhaled, calm for the first time in days. Expert retaliation doesn't scream. It doesn't rage. It ends things. Permanently. The mountain was quiet the next morning. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has already chosen its loser. Riley and I had breakfast in the cabin. The same wooden table my father built. The same lake outside the window. The same trees swaying like nothing violent had ever happened here. But everything had changed. Because victory doesn't always show up with cheering. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in paperwork, in the slow crumble of every lie the villains thought would protect them. The county sheriff called at 7:14 a.m. sharp. Claudia had already broken, not emotionally, strategically. She spent the night trying to negotiate with federal prosecutors, offering excuses, blaming the goons she commanded, swearing she never meant for Riley to be harmed. But the problem with villains like Claudia is simple. They think authority flows from fear. They think power comes from a title. They think control means shouting the loudest. They never expect someone with real authority to walk in. Especially not someone whose daughter they tried to drag off a porch. Prosecutors told me her voice shook when they read out the charges. She asked if the HOA could handle this internally. They said the words she'd never expected to hear. You are under federal jurisdiction now. And just like that, the queen of the petty kingdom collapsed. But that's not even the half of it. HOA members began resigning within hours. Emails poured in, each funnier than the last. I don't support Claudia's actions. I was unaware of the unauthorized enforcement unit. I did not approve the impersonation protocols. Everyone who once marched behind her clipboard now tripped over themselves to distance from her. Power-drunk parasites ditching their queen the second real consequences arrived. Federal auditors descended next. They seized every HOA document, every meeting recording, every expenditure Claudia ever approved. They froze the HOA's accounts. They flagged every illegal fine. They traced every misuse of funds. And when they were done, they signed the order dissolving Pine Ridge Shores HOA entirely. No appeal, no vote, no last meeting where Claudia could bang her gavel. Just dissolution. Erased. Gone. The HOA cult vanished from the lake overnight. Here's where everything blew apart for good. Word spread across the county that the two goons were officially charged with attempted kidnapping, impersonation, felony trespass, assault on a minor, and obstruction. They signed plea deals so fast the ink barely dried. 14 years each. No badge, no authority, no future. Their mugshots made the local news. The same men who strutted onto my property wearing stitched vests and plastic decals now stared at cameras with swollen eyes and hospital bandages. Their families tried defending them online. That didn't last long. The truth crushed every excuse. Meanwhile, Claudia received her sentence. 18 years, federal time. No early release. No sympathy. No HOA meetings to preside over behind bars. She left the courtroom in shackles. The same sound she once threatened others with through fines and intimidation letters. The humiliation was total. 2 days after sentencing, Riley and I drove down to the lake together. The HOA sign was gone. The surveillance poles removed. The cheap SUV the goons used had been towed and impounded. For the first time in months, Riley walked the shoreline with no one watching her, no one circling the property, no one pretending to have control over her life. She picked up a smooth stone, skipped it across the water, and finally smiled like the fear had been completely washed away. It feels different, she said. It feels like it's ours again. She didn't have to say anything else. She was right. The air felt cleaner. The land felt lighter. Victory feels like ownership restored. Peace returned. Fear removed at the root. That night, as the sun dropped behind the ridge and the lake turned gold, I sat on the porch with coffee in hand, watching Riley read by the window. The same porch where they grabbed her. The same boards her shoes scraped against when she fought them. Now quiet, now safe, now untouchable. And that's when the final call came, an update from federal headquarters. All assets the HOA seized illegally would be returned to homeowners, all fines refunded, all violations struck from record. The entire HOA was wiped clean from the legal system like it never existed. My daughter stepped onto the porch beside me. She looked at the trees, the water, the cabin, then at the empty road leading up the mountain. "It's over, isn't it?" she said. I nodded. "Completely. No more trespassing, no more intimidation, no more wannabe cops pretending the lake belonged to them." The last trace of their authority died in a courtroom. The final echo of their power dissolved in silence. And as the wind moved through the trees, the truth settled into the mountain like it had been waiting for this moment. The power trip ended instantly.